All right, another segment of What Your Palate. We got a special guest today, Nolan Lamkin. He was the champion in 2023 of the Superbike Cup National Championship.
Thank you, guys. Looking forward to being on.
Yeah, we got to talk about a bunch of stuff. So
his first bike was a motorcycle at 2.5 years old. So this origin story is awesome.
From the age of 2, said, screw the bike pedals. I want a motor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We also go over social media world, how you're educating people, teaching them a lot out there.
It was also cool talking about getting into racing and different ways that you can do that.
The technology that's embedded in the bikes and how you progress your performance by, utilizing some of that. There's a lot of detail that I didn't know existed in motor racing. So thanks for joining.
Then I see a 30-foot hole in the center of the ice, and I'm going towards it like 80 miles an hour, 90 miles an hour. And as the time that I realize it, I start trying to adjust for it, but I couldn't adjust. And then I went the bike's like halfway in the ice. I'm holding on to it because it's someone else's bike. It was crazy. I was like bruised from my ankles to my like upper thigh in like 30 minutes. You know how long it normally takes to bruise? That was instant.
Whoa. Wait, when you said halfway, was the bike like almost like into one of those holes, like in the water?
Yeah. Yeah, because basically what it was is there was a warm spring in that lake that they didn't tell me about. And so as I'm going out, that warm spring is like warming the middle of the ice. So it's thinner there too. And I'm holding on, waiting on someone else to come, but I'm 500 yards from the shore. Like I'm not close. So then somebody's like coming out. I'm 13. I can't lift the bike up. I hear the ice like creaking, and I'm thinking like, what is going on? But I made it out fine. They pushed the bike back, lost the GoPro. Wasn't mine, so I didn't really care.
What state was that in?
Yeah.
Michigan.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Ice fishing.
That's like crazy that you just jumped into that situation.
So you were on a 252 stroke, and I've ridden one of those. Those things are insane. It was like an older Honda, probably like 90s. What were you riding?
I believe it was a Suzuki. I'm not sure because it was someone else's bike that I was riding. But yeah, those things have a ton of power to them.
And was it spiked tires or were they just studded?
Yeah, so they're spike tires, and that's to help grip the ice. If you were to have just a regular tire, it'd slip. So they put a whole bunch of screws all on the outside of them, and it helps to grip the ice a little better.
And so you wouldn't want to take your like super cross bike out or your super bike out on the ice with studded tires?
No, there was one guy a few years ago, and Marc Marquez is the world champion in MotoGP. They had put spikes onto his tires, and he rode it up some Swiss Alp ski resort, and just watching that was crazy. But yeah, I'll leave that for someone else.
I mean, hey, you'll get views on that. That's like, throw that on TikTok.
Sure. Hell yeah. And you'll with as far as like racing goes, you'll race in all weather, right? If it's raining, they'll still race in that.
Yes. Yeah, we do still race in the rain. The only thing is if there starts to become like too much standing water, or different like kind of there's certain kind of particular use cases, but yes, we race whether it's 110 out or whether it's 40 and raining.
That's wild. On 2 wheels.
Yeah.
I got one of my sons has he's 16 years old and just got his second street bike, so Kawasaki Ninja, which he loves, but he gets really squirrely when it gets wet out here.
I can imagine. The other thing being out there is you guys don't really get as much rain. It's like the oil and that stuff doesn't get pushed out as much as what I would think versus being somewhere like Hawaii or somewhere else.
Yeah, where you get constant rain. Yeah.
Yeah.
We still need more rain out here. SoCal needs more rain too.
Hey, dude. So should we?
Yeah, you want to do the introduction?
Yeah. Did we do that?
Yeah. Welcome to Go With Your Palate. We already started.
We're
here. We got a special guest today. We got Nolan Lamkin.
Yay!
You're the 2023 Superbike Cup National Champion.
Yes, that is correct.
That is you, man.
And you're like 18? I'm kidding.
I'm 23.
23. Nice. And so, like, well, welcome to Go With Your Palate. I'm Joe Wagner, Chris Rubio. Really excited to have you on, talking about your experiences, how you overcome adversity, how you overcome the fear of fucking barreling through into a corner at like 150 miles per hour.
Dude, his knee touches. We'll get into that.
But no, we're really excited. I think we got a lot of good stuff to talk about today. But welcome to the show. So 23 years old. I just got to start out by saying, like, what is like the general career lifespan? Like, much like the NFL, right? Like, when do you start seeing people kind of trail off?
Yeah, it's a great question. And thank you, Chris and Joe, for having me on. I really appreciate it. The lifespan, so to speak, of a racing career is different, and it's also changed as well. Generally, like 35 or so tends to be the age, but Josh Hayes, he won the MotoAmerica Superbike championship, and he's still racing. I think he's in his 40s, mid 40s, late 40s. So it's getting longer. And there's electronic aids and some other stuff with the bikes that help make them more user friendly and more people can ride them safely. So it's kind of like if you were to think of football, as you mentioned, like the career in football, if you're able to be Tom Brady and you're not running and doing all this stuff, you're more of a pocket passer, your career is going to be different versus a guy like a Lamar Jackson, so to speak, where you're going out and you're taking all these hits and doing that stuff. So it is a kind of changing landscape.
That's awesome. Well, I mean, I think we should go like straight into like an origin story. I'd love to hear kind of how you got started. I understand you started riding bikes, probably dirt bikes at a young age. You got that, gasoline running through your blood from the onset.
I think he got his first bike when he was like 2.5 or something.
Let's start with the motorless bike. When did you get on two wheels on your own?
Yeah.
The first bike that I got on with two wheels was a motorcycle. I think it was.
I told you, I wasn't joking, dude.
No way.
Yeah, 2.5. Santa Claus had brought me a motorcycle, so very appreciative of that guy. And yeah, started riding that. It was a JR50, the Suzuki small dirt bike, and just riding it around. My family's kind of into drag racing, and that's what my dad liked. And then on the other side of my family, that's what my grandpa and they kind of liked. So the road racing was a bit different. MotoGP, which is that international series, came to Indianapolis in 2008. And so then after that came, I really wanted to start road racing. And my dad kind of asked me, do you want to get into drag racing? And I had said, no, I want to do the races with the turns. He looked at me and said, what are you talking about? Are you sure you're my son? So and it's kind of grown from there.
Have I taught you nothing, boy? So when you say drag racing, you're talking motorcycle drag racing.
Yes, correct. Yeah, just like club stuff for fun. Couple local drag strips. And they just like going out and doing those.
God, that's awesome. How old were you when you did your first GP race, or just your first street race?
Yeah, so the first race I think I was 8 years old, and it was on a go-kart track, ironically. And it's taking that small bike, putting like scooter tires, road tires on it, and then going and riding it at a go-kart track. And that's one of the things that can be accessible for other people, is it's not going and finding some big track. There's go-kart tracks more kind of easily available. And those are quite fun. So I started that at 8. I started racing in the national series MotoAmerica when I was 14, and I was the youngest kid in that class because I made the cutoff by like 2 or 3 weeks. So, and yeah, it's kind of grown from there.
And so they classify partly by age. At what point do you get to? I mean, I guess you can probably qualify even at 14 years old to race at the highest level if you're that good.
So there's different classes and there's different requirements for each class. So the class that I started in, previously the age you had to be was 16. This one, they lowered the limit, so it was 14. And that one at that time was 14 to 21 years old. So me being 14, I was younger in that. And then different classes kind of have different rules, but generally it's 14 for that or 16 for the 600s and then 18 to race 1,000. And then after that, it's kind of all open for those other classes.
All right. That's wild. Well, I got to ask, there's one race that I see a lot of, just like clips of it. It's the Isle of Man. Is that something that's like on your radar ever, or is that just that one just seems fucking insane?
Yeah, Joe, you're 100% right. It is insane. I've watched it. I don't really like watching it. It kind of gives me heart palpitations. It's just, there's certain aspects that are cool, and like riding on the cliffs and those high speed shots where they're just ripping right next to the edge.
Yeah.
I think those are cool. When they're in the street and they're popping a wheelie and it's coming down and there's a like a brick house 3 feet off the edge of the road, that part does give me the willies.
There's some stat. I'm going to look it up real quick, but there's some wild stat about the death rate of it too.
Is this like where they're riding?
It takes place on the Isle of Man, and it's just like an all-out. I mean, literally, just you go. I mean, as you probably do it on a track too. You're going as fast as you possibly can. You're taking every corner. It's just, I think, the circumstances of it, because you are going through residential areas. You're on like a road, just regular, windy road. That it's much more dangerous.
The Isle of Man is a road race, so it's public streets. It's been going on for decades, half a century, probably longer. And it's, like you said, on the Isle of Man. So you're racing around an island. I think one lap is, I want to say 20 minutes. It's crazy. And I think it's like 40 kilometers. I may have those numbers incorrect in my head, but it's crazy. They'll do like 3 laps, and that 3 laps will equal the race because it's so long. It's really dangerous because they're doing refueling. So then there's just a lot of different things that go on with that race.
What's like the top speed that you reach in your races?
For me, on the class of bike that I've been on, 185 miles an hour, give or take.
Wow.
And the crazy thing is the average speed, some tracks were 100 miles an hour. So you're thinking of driving on the road, and the max you get on the road is 60, 70, whatever. The average that we're going is 100.
The average?
Jeez.
Wow.
That's wild. And are you running on 1,000 cc's now? Or do you mix it up? So just straight to the top?
I've been racing 1,000.
Okay. Man. So Isle of Man is out for you. You want to stick with the more professional stuff. Not that that's not professional, but
yeah, it's a totally different sport. So I'm not saying I would never do it, but certainly not right now.
And I just wanted to touch on this recent amazing accomplishment of the Superbike Cup champion that you got in 2023. How has that impacted your career, and also where does that fit? I'm also curious about where you fit in winning that in the age range too, because you're still so so youthful and stuff like that, and already making these accomplishments. It's amazing, man. So
yeah, thank you. So yeah, winning that championship was great. Won that in 23. Last year I did finish 3rd place in that same championship, so the first person to win it and then still be on the podium at the season's end the next year. So it was great. And there's different stuff that I've been working on. Visit Indiana has been super cool as well to kind of help with the whole partnership with the team. With Visit Indiana, it's been great. With the championship, it's been fantastic because it's like that year, I think we dropped 2 seconds a lap at pretty much every track we went back to. So if you're thinking of a minute 30 lap time, 2 seconds is quite substantial.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of other pieces that go into it. And my guys are amazing.
Is there a coach or, I'm curious, not just from the starting point of getting on a track and just, hitting the curves and cruising around to like, here's your form, here's how you perfect your form. I mean, with a golf swing, you can, put sensors all over and they can analyze the hell out of it and say like, here's where we need to tweak a slight angle. Like what level of performance enhancement is there between a coach and the technologies that are available today at your level?
Yeah. That's a great question. There's a lot of different things going on. So on the bike that's behind me, there's tons of sensors that are on it. And there's a little black box, if you were to think of an airplane, where they're always logging different stuff. So the bike then tracks all of that information. And that's been one of the big things for myself is having someone to go over that data with, because there's kind of 2 separate things. There's your riding and the skill, the technique that you do. And then also the other aspect of having the bike work well, the suspension, the electronics, the fueling, the power, the this, the that. And the electronics play a huge part in it. So I'll work with a coach for my own technical craft. And there's some different stuff that I've worked on in particular for that. But for sensors and whatnot, that's such a huge part. And one of the things that there's a big disparity as well between different teams and having a person to go through all that information is totally game changer. And that year in 23, kind of midway through, I kind of gotten my own guy to help go over that technical data. Because some of the other people, they've got full-time guys that they're paying and flying over from Germany to work on their stuff. So that was one of the other things that really meant a lot to me, is all the work that we were able to put in to get to that point with the resources we had.
I was curious if you have somebody on the team that does analyze that. It sounds like that's a specialized skill. And so at the end of the race, they download all the data, and then they come to you and say, instead of like, "Hey, you won, good job," they say, "This is what you could do better." Kind of a dick move, but that's that's like how my dad was in winemaking. Like he's like, "Oh, that's a good wine, but like you could do better." I'm like, "God damn it, okay." But hey, it motivated me to do better every time.
Does he still do that?
Yeah, he does. Hell yeah, he does. So like, what are some of those like just minute adjustments that brought your game up to that, like cutting 2 seconds off of each lap?
Yeah, so there's a few things. Generally, what I do is we'll come in after a race is done, and I'll give my immediate feedback on whatever I feel, because there's always something with the bike. And it's also a checks and balances where you make one area better, but then that may take away from somewhere else. But I'll come in, give whatever feelings I've got, tell the crew. And then afterwards, it's then downloading the data, going through and then parsing through what's there, what's not. When I'm able to work with the engineer like that, sometimes it's kind of like a David and Goliath situation. So for me, that's what makes me feel better about the whole thing as well. So there's kind of different processes. Then we'll go through their screens with different the information written out, going through and finding it. Okay, if I had this instance of this thing happening at this turn on this lap, it's going back in, looking at it, seeing what caused it, and kind of how to make improvements from there. Because there's suspension, there's electronics, and it's getting all of it to work together so you're not being antagonistic or fighting against each other. And sometimes you're having a suspension issue, but maybe it's caused by the electronics or vice versa. So there's different things that all go into it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And are you able to adjust on the fly some of those items, like the suspension? Is your bike has a computer on board that is able to say, all right, in this turn, it's going to tighten up?
So the way that it works for me and my bike, and also the Superbike Cup championship that I'm in, it's also kind of a race within a race. So there's some other bikes that are out there. If you were to think of like an IMSA race, they'll have multiple classes going out. So in my race, I was racing a $40,000 bike, for example, against other bikes that are like $140,000. So the difference was quite substantial. And there's certain changes that, yes, I can make to the bike, but it's also kind of limited. So those other bikes that are 140 Gs, they can do more with them. With mine, it was a little more limited. And there was an instance where the final race of that year in 2023, I qualified like 0.2 of a second behind the full on like factory Superbike on my bike, which I thought was great. But you can adjust stuff with the handlebar. So when you're going down the straightaway or you're in a turn, you can kind of make some different adjustments, but you can't adjust the shape of anything. You can only adjust the level. So if you're thinking in your car, you're braking for that stop sign, and you're also then going to make a turn afterwards. Or let's say you're coming off an on-ramp and you got a green light. You're going to brake, and you want the car to kind of slow down more, because there's a certain point in which the car is maybe you're not having to be that hard on the brake, but it's still slowing you down. All I can do is adjust where that level is. So it's like straight up and down, it may be more, but you want less as you're turning in. And you can't adjust the difference. Like I want more engine braking straight up and down, but not as much when the bike's actually leaned over. And you just can't have that adjustability. I don't know if that makes sense or if that was too much in the weeds, but that's kind of an overview.
No, that does make sense.
Yeah, and we're talking about, 0.2 of a second. Every second counts.
Yeah, so would that guy be chill with you just being like, Hey, can I just take your bike out on the track for like one lap and see how I do on it?
Does that go well in the racing community? Like, are you allowed to just like take someone? I mean, do people like let other people just take their bikes out for a little ride?
Honestly, the community is great,
Yeah.
and it is so open and sharing and different stuff. During the weekend, definitely not. There's no way you could do that during the races. But if there's a testing weekend or you're doing some other stuff, possibly. But it also depends on the guy. Sometimes some people are great. Sometimes some people aren't. It's just your poison.
It's true, and I mean, just talking about the community, I think you've been open to share your racing data and insights, and especially on social media, you're very active and focusing on education. I was wondering, what motivated you to be so transparent, and how do you think it's benefiting the community?
Yeah, I love doing that. For me, how I view everything that I do, I've put out my data online, I've written articles, I've given information away. It's all about helping the younger version of myself, where when I was younger, I wanted to be able to have some of those resources that I didn't. So if I can provide that back to the community, then that's great. So different people then come up to me afterwards and say, "Oh, hey, I had used your data for X, Y, or Z." And that's the data that we had kind of talked about earlier that the bike is collecting and all of that information. When people come back to me and say, "Hey, this like totally changed my riding," that's amazing. When different people post online, and there was one guy in particular, and it was at this racetrack in New Jersey, and he said, me and Nolan, we were doing pretty much the exact same things and we were running the exact same time, except he was 10 seconds quicker and 20 miles an hour faster in every single turn on that track. But we're pretty much the same. And stuff like that.
So what are the limitations for you to be able to get a bike that is that much more advanced? I mean, I'm sure that there's a point at which you reach, like, the value of diminishing returns, right? Where you could spend an extra 20 grand and you're only going to get 1 percentage point more performance, whatever numbers you want to put at it. But is that a sponsorship thing, or is that coming directly from your pocket? Do you make any money from TikTok? Like, I don't, but yeah.
He does, but he just doesn't know he does.
Oh, it goes to Chris's bank account. I'm sure, yeah. I wasn't willing to give my information up to the Chinese government. So.
I gave him your social. Anyways, I digress. Go ahead, Nolan.
Yeah, so what are the limitations in being able to upgrade to that level of equipment?
Yeah, so there's different stuff for that, and it also depends on what championship you're in. Where if you think of UFC, you have like one event a year. You may have two. The max, you kind of have three. Racing, we're doing the season, so it needs to all work together. There's not really a sense in changing something mid-year to go to a different class because you have all the points built up from the previous month's races. So there's some of that stuff kind of going into the year that you have to have the plan set. Obviously, sponsorship plays a huge part in it, and partnerships and partnering with the right brands. And it's also, what does that brand want to accomplish and how is it best to go about it? So there's different things and different avenues to go about it. Obviously, if you find someone who's got tons of money and they just want to help sink it into it, then all right, great. Like you said as well, there's kind of the law of diminishing returns, and there's certain stuff where you're almost kind of paying for the exclusivity, where it's very difficult to get it, and it is better, but it's not like going from, if people ride on track, going from a street bike with complete OEM suspension, original suspension, to getting some race kit. That intro race kit is a huge difference and a huge gap. Once you go from a race kit to whatever the highest end is, obviously there's a big difference, but it gets less. It's not as profound of an impact, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I'll relate that to wine as well. Like, that's, people think of like, oh, you can get one of the best Cabernets for $100 out of Napa Valley. Maybe that's, like, in your mind, 90. If you go from a point scale, 96 points. You can also spend $1,000 on a really good Cabernet. Maybe that's only 97 points, though, in your mind. So it's kind of like, there's that balance somewhere. There's that sweet spot where you're maximizing the value for the performance or perceived performance of what you're getting.
Yeah, totally. Totally.
Yeah.
And there's also so many things that go in with it where there's the crew. You can buy all the pieces, but if you don't have the crew, the personnel, the team to run it, then you're wasting it. So it's all a delicate balance.
And you mentioned UFC and your and like the analogy or comparison. So it made me think of rivalries. And, you know, I know that, especially UFC, because I'm a big UFC fan, that tends to be a thing, right? Like, people talking smack, like, at the competition in sports. And we have that, right? Like, in NASCAR, you know, they've had rivalries and stuff in other sports. And I was wondering what that's like. And do you have, like, a rival, someone that, like, pushes you, you know, and motivates you to just keep going, doing better, other than yourself, obviously. You do a good job at that.
Like negative motivation? Where you want to kick
that
somebody's
you
ass.
yeah, you know what I mean? Yeah, like you're talking smack. You know, maybe there's a little bump on the track. I don't know. Is there no bumping?
There's definitely bumping on track. Yeah, and that's also something interesting with racing is it's a vehicle sport, but you're like your body's there, like you're hitting other people, and it's kind of unique with that. If you hit a car, you don't feel it. If somebody hits you, you definitely feel it on the bike. So there is that. Rivals, like you said, for me, I'm always trying to focus on bettering my own performance. Is there one rival in particular that I have? I don't have a sexy answer for that. No, but it's whoever I'm going up against. So there's that other person. I just want to go and beat them, whatever that is. So I don't have one name that I can think of and say, oh, John Smith.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I was going to say we could. I mean, if you want to bring somebody into this, and then we can, you know, just talk some trash about them and really start a rivalry. I mean, that's always an option.
Well, I think. I was like thinking about this that with, you know, sometimes a lot of that beef gets brought up to kind of bring, I think, not only more attention in, but more money. And in this sense, you're kind of looking at, and correct me if I'm wrong, but sponsorship is like a big part and more important than that. So maybe it's not so much about, you know, building or pumping up this rivalry for sense of bringing the money in, but also just you're kind of working your own angle to just get some good sponsorships. I mean, is that how it goes?
That is definitely an aspect of it. And with UFC, maybe the fighters have some vested interest in them selling more pay-per-views or whatever the case may be. So the bigger they can make it, then the more exciting it is, the more money they make back. For racing, we don't get a cut of like what the ticket sales are. We get our payment through different ways. So certain people do that, and there's riders in particular who kind of egg that stuff on, and maybe they feel like that's the only way they can get motivated is by pointing the finger at someone else and saying, I hate that guy, and that's how they do it. But for me, it's a little different. So there definitely are rivals. But the other thing is like with UFC, the fights are kind of less frequent. It's 1, 2, maybe 3 a year. For racing, if we're going out and we've got a race every other week for the next 3 months, you say something in week 1, you got to back it up in week 2, week 3, week 4. So then it's a lot more going on.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and I like your point about there's not a vested interest. I mean, like Conor McGregor gets out there and he's purely doing it for promotion. Like he doesn't actually hate everybody. Maybe he does, but he doesn't seem to really like anybody anybody in the world.
I saw something of this like when that fight that he had with Khabib, and they had some mics on like what they were saying like inside the arena.
Yeah.
You know, when Khabib just like wiped the floor with
him.
Oh yeah. And there was something like Khabib was it sounded like he was actually really pissed at him. And he was just like, what now? You know, and just like really just like beating him up. And there was a point where Conor said something to the extent of like, you know, it's just for the it was just for like the money, you know, it's just for the money. It was just for like the hype, you know what I mean? It's just the hype, dude. Like, you know, like, and he's like, no,
you talk shit, man. I'm gonna
and we all know how that ended.
Yeah.
Weren't you there?
I was. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, man.
Yeah, do you know about this fight where like everyone jumped in the ring and everything?
No, I did not know that. I've heard some of the quotes from Khabib leading up to it, and I thought those were amazing, but I didn't actually watch the fight. See, like people jumped in.
Yeah, there were like some of the team members got in fights in the ring. They jumped the fence, and fans got in, and I mean there were like
Joe got in.
I
I
got
like,
I got
put his bell glass out there.
I got our group, and like I was like, we're getting out of here. There were like fights breaking out in the crowd everywhere.
Even outside of it, I saw like there was footage of like all around, dude, Vegas.
So that doesn't really happen, and
not as much. And like also, there are people, and there was a racer in particular that I'm thinking of, Marco Simoncelli, and he had gotten together with this other guy, Danny Pedrosa, and I think Simoncelli had taken Pedrosa out, and then that became more because Danny Pedrosa was Spanish, and so all the Spaniards hated Marco Simoncelli, and they were like sending him death threats. So then Simoncelli had to go to the next race with like an entourage and security. I think he ended up getting pole position that weekend, so he qualified in first place. And as he did that, then he's riding a wheelie around the track, like waving to all the Spanish fans as they're flipping him off. So some of that stuff is more as a byproduct, not them specifically trying to do it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, they're not doing it for promotion so much. They're doing it out of their grandeur. They're just a little show off.
Yeah, and that's one of the other things is you're racing with these guys, and if you're going to be out there with them and you make an enemy out of someone, there's times where they could just do everything in their power to mess your race up. Maybe they've not got the speed in the race, but they'll just keep passing you, so then you can't either create a gap to the people behind you, or you need to catch somebody in front of you. They could really make your life terrible and miserable. So sometimes in that, it's better to have more friends than enemies, because maybe they won't fight you as much. Not that that's really the case, because everybody's in it for their own thing, but you can also just have someone ram into the side of you with a motorcycle, which certainly wouldn't feel good if they don't like you.
Yeah, really. Yeah. And so I wanted to talk about your team. So you have how many people are on your team?
Yeah, so the past few years I've had 2 mechanics, and then I work with a veterans organization and called Vet to Track. And Vet to Track will then provide a veteran to basically work as part of the team for each weekend. So that's something that's been really cool. And then previously BMW had helped me with an electronic engineer. So that's someone else that's kind of a floater in and out. Last year it changed, and that was kind of one of the big things for me. But then we still had good races after that, even after he left. So it's always kind of a work in progress and making improvements. It's not, this is my people, we're never changing anything after that. It's making improvements and iterations going forward.
And so you're doing a lot of the work on your bike yourself.
Thankfully, not me. The guys that I've had the last few years are amazing. The less that I can touch the bike, the better it is for me. So then I can focus on what I need to focus on and trust that they're doing all the right things.
Okay, and for your team, it's just one rider, right? It's just you. There's no. I mean, do you guys look at expanding into? I don't know how that whole part of this this scene works. Like, are there people that have multiple riders or racers, or is it just kind of like much more singled out?
Yeah, so there's different stuff for different people, and different teams have different mentalities. So for me, it's just been myself on my program. There's stuff that I'm working on for this upcoming season, joining with other people, and then that would be a different situation. I'm currently in those contract talks right now. So that's my particulars. Other teams have different situations, and sometimes having more riders is beneficial because then you have more happening, so you can test and try different things before the races, so then you get more feedback back to the team to make better decisions on stuff. But also there was one team in particular where they just have one rider, and that's what they've got, and that's how they kind of maximize it. So there's different stuff for different situations. It's not like the NFL where you've got, 52 people who can line up, so then they always have 52. It's kind of different.
Okay, and so is there like, who's the biggest team out there that usually has the most racers on the track?
So there's different series, and there's the International Series racing prototype bikes. That's kind of like F1. And then there's the National Series, and it's kind of more what I would say like IndyCar is, where it's a National Series racing more or less production based things. IndyCar is not totally production, but you kind of get the gist. So in the series here in the US, we race nationally from New Jersey to California. The team there that I would say has the most people, I would say is probably the Suzuki team, Team Hammer, because they have a lot of people in a lot of different classes. Generally, if you're doing one class, the max will be 2 riders, but sometimes they'll have only one. It's just kind of depending, and it changes each year depending on just how the behind the scenes stuff works.
And so a team like that, obviously, I'm assuming it's sponsored by Suzuki or owned by Suzuki. Suzuki, is that correct? Or
Yeah, I believe they're sponsored by Suzuki.
okay, and so they kind of have a goal. Obviously, everybody wants to win, and they want to promote whatever product it is they're trying to sell through their sponsor and whatnot. So, but do you have a different kind of end game for yourself? Is there something besides just the love of the sport that you're wanting to achieve?
So there's different stuff that I'm working on, and like for my goals in particular, I'm wanting to be in the best situation that I can be. I don't want to pick out a point and say, well, this is how I'm going to get there. I kind of view it like climbing a tree. It's not really that good to go and pick a branch and say, I want to get to that branch. It's more that you start climbing the tree, and as stuff splits off, you try and take the best route that you can. And then you end up wherever you end up, and then you can look at the view from the top of the tree from there. So there's different stuff. And for me, I would love to be able to race overseas, but it's seeing what good situations are. I don't want to go and put myself in a bad spot, put my supporters in a bad spot, just to say that I'm doing something. I want to make sure that I'm doing it right.
Well said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. And I think you're already, doing great with being at the height that you're at. Especially like I said, watching your social, I think you have such great content, education, even for new people kind of into the sport. I got my motorcycle license almost a year ago.
And you still don't have a motorcycle.
We didn't need to say that, but anyways, but I was watching like your videos.
You gonna get one of those e-bikes, Chris? Is that get yourself a scooter, a little moped?
No training wheels. Okay, I know what I want. All right. It's an Indian Scout Bobber. I'm just waiting for the perfect bike. But back to Nolan. But watching these videos, and I love it. Like, it was simply, hey, how do you know your tire? You need to change your tire, or your tire's getting worn. And it was actually just a video of you taking a turn, and there was like that wobble. And then, you got up, and it was like kind of like seeing it visually, or difference between 2-stroke and 4-stroke. All this kind of stuff is great. Or even like what we've been kind of touching on is what's the difference of these races? And I think it was a great one where you were comparing people that may be more aware of F1, but what is the F1 equivalent, with a motorcycle, which is it MotoGP? Was that it?
Yes.
Okay. So you taught me. Thank you. I'm just trying to show off. What? See?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to get the bike, dude. What about you, dude? You don't even have your license.
I don't have my license.
Yeah.
I actually I can't get my license because I have a life insurance policy that forbids me from I know.
Nolan is like 23. We're just like these old dying we're like, thank you for being on Go With Your Palate. I cannot ride my motorcycle because of my life insurance.
Yeah.
That's what you gotta look forward to, bro.
Yeah.
Great to have you on. Anyways,
whenever you need getting old age advice, you can just give us a call anytime, man. We're here for you.
But I'm curious because Joe, actually, you guys have that in common. He puts himself out there too. Education is like really important for him, and I think that's why we get him to go out and do all these social media things. I do like to touch on. Do you ever have to deal with? Because you did share a story where you actually did impact someone positively. Do you ever have to deal with trolls though? Do you ever have to deal with people that you have to kind of go at it with, or?
Couldn't imagine anybody talking trash.
Yeah,
to you,
I
honestly.
can't imagine it. Or you put some content down there like, well, that's not how you do it. Actually,
Yeah.
There's actually a 5-stroke.
Definitely. I mean, everybody has some level of people always saying stuff. So yes and no. Thankfully, like I'll say, like a lot of times when people are saying negative things, it's because they're misinformed or they don't know. And maybe they're saying something and they feel like they know, but they don't. And when someone starts talking to me about motorcycles and they're saying some absolutely off the wall, harebrained stuff, like, all right, yeah, cool. I do not care. So there's different things.
One thing, I'm curious if you do this as well. One thing that we've been able to do is there are a lot of people that are misinformed, right, about really anything, and they can also at the same time claim to be an expert on the subject, right? So we'll take those criticisms, I'll call them that, and use that, like repost that comment, and then use it to educate more deeply in that segment of whatever it is we're talking about. Do you utilize that as a tool as well on your social media?
Yes, 100%. That's a great way of doing things. And I like doing that because it's not just what I think of. It's someone else having a totally different opinion, viewing it. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. I can talk about this. And people ask me, do we have any communication, like in-ear communication? Can I talk to my crew while I'm racing? And I can't. There is no in-ear communication. The only thing that we can use is a board they hang over the front straightaway with very limited information on it. So, and then that video turned out great and I got tons of responses from it, and it kind of builds from there. So getting comments from the community is awesome. It's so helpful. And I really enjoy having that discussion with people, educating people. I know what I know, you don't know it. So can I help answer beginner questions, deeper questions, all different stuff, and help just grow the knowledge base.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I think more people need to be using that because I think that's, well, I mean, especially, the younger generation, how they're intaking information. You want to have kind of a solution to every way people want to learn, and being able to maximize it in those avenues, I think is just, the more we do that, I think the more educated we're all going to be. And
yeah, totally.
We seem to need
and
that a lot.
I feel like everybody, you learn from other people. And like for myself, I've learned from amazing people. And if I wasn't in the situation to learn from them, I never would know it. So if I can help pass that information on, I feel like I'm doing my good back to the community. I'm fortunate to be in these situations, so then I need to spread it to more people rather than just having that information die with that person or die with me or not pass on.
Yeah, like the philosophy of having like an open patent, right? So it's like, you created something, but let other people utilize it. And that's that's a recipe for quick progress. I do want to kind of go back a little bit in time because one of my sons, one who's got a Kawasaki and loves it, he wants to bring it out to a track, and he wants to get into, street racing. So, and he's 16, so he's starting a little later, quite a bit later than you did. What would the best way to do? Is that you just pay for track time, get out there, get comfortable? Like, what was your progression after the go-kart track? Once you got on some, like a serious bike, did you have somebody coaching you? Did you just get acquainted with it and start ripping? What was your journey in that?
Is this really the end? Unbelievable. Find out next week